So last fall, when I was at the Woodbury School of Business and I'm on their National Advisory Council, they asked for nominations for this award. And in that council, there are so many wonderful men and women who serve there, full of integrity, and that's why they've been asked to serve. And I was listening to all the people who were being nominated, and I thought, oh yeah, that'd be a perfect person. Oh, I like them. Oh yes, they're the right one. Well, sitting next to me was my good friend, Jeanette Bennett, and she raised her hand and she said, oh, one moment, I have to adjust my earring here. I'm all about the earrings, in case if you ever watch me. So Jeanette said, I want to nominate Mary Crafts, and I just looked at it and went, yeah, right. And I didn't even think they wrote it down. It was like more of a joke, I thought. And then later at the UVU, at the President's Ball, the president of the college came up to me and said, the dean came up to me and said, Mary, we've selected you to receive this award. And at that moment in time, the tears just welled up inside of me as I realized that this award was something different than I had ever received before, something different than Best of State, something different than the International Caterer of the Year, something different than anything else, something different than just about business. This was a personal award, an award that actually exemplified what I had wanted to achieve my entire life. It was the one thing that I had put out there, that if I was known for anything, at the end of my career, I wanted to be known as a woman of integrity. So it's indeed humbling to get this award because as you look at it, you think, now you're under a microscope all the time to make sure that people are making sure that, oh, is she walking the walk? You know, she talks the talk pretty good, but she walked the walk. And you constantly have that underneath my mind as I've gone since I've received this award. So many of life's decisions are formed in the early years, and my dad was certainly the one that set that precedent for me. At his funeral, there were hundreds of people who came up to me and said a single phrase, your dad was the most honest man I ever knew. And when I was growing up, people in where I grew up in Iowa didn't use the word integrity. That was too big of a word. We're a farm country. They used the word honest. Simple, straightforward, honest. There are so many of those words that are interchangeable with this concept of ethics. Honesty, trusted, integrity. All have to do with business ethics. Ethics not only just in business, but in your personal life. I'll talk about that a little bit later, about this imaginary line that we choose to draw between our personal life and our business life. But for me, this is the highest possible achievable goal. I want to take you back a little bit in time prior to culinary crafts, when I was just married. And of course, when you're first married and you're going out on your own, you want everything in life. So it wasn't very long before we bought a yellow Cadillac Eldorado. I loved it. It had these yellow leather seats. It was fabulous. And things started putting up on credit cards, living outside of our means, and we borrowed more money than we could afford to lose. Along the way, in those first few years, we opened a gelato store, all on borrowed money. And when that store closed after only 4 months, we were losing it all. Creditors calling. We were losing our condo. I woke up one morning, looked outside, and called the police. Someone stole my car, my new yellow Eldorado Cadillac. What's your name? And I gave them my name. They said, that was repossessed last night. Really? Okay, I just put new tires on it. Do I get the tires back? No, you don't, in case you're wondering. And then when I was in the middle of this kind of a nightmare, with that kind of being out of alignment with what I believed to be right, because remember, I had been raised by an honest man and an honest mother. So living this life put me so out of integrity that I decided to start culinary crafts. And this was a difficult decision to make because, of course, we had no money. And just $150 to begin this business. Early on, one of my biggest clients was Geneva Steel. It was my first big client. And they had just reopened, and they were, of course, located not very far from where our facility is in Orem. And that was back when I was doing it all, shopping for the groceries, preparing the food, taking it, serving it, bringing it back, cleaning it up, everything. So that morning I was over there. They were having a board meeting for Geneva Steel. And I had set up my little continental breakfast, had my little coffee. I'm there sitting in the corner, just making sure everyone's bussing their little conference room table, making sure everyone's taken care of. And I sat there, but I learned so much in those board meetings just listening. And I will never forget the day that the new accountant for Geneva Steel stood up, because there was some contention in this board meeting between the two brothers, and there's one faction over here and one faction over here. And this accountant stood up, and he said, "Let me tell you about the man, Joe Cannon, who stands as the chairman of this corporation. I was his accountant in Washington, D.C. And if you can imagine being accountant in Washington, D.C., you have everyone, all your clients, coming up to you and saying things like, so if I do this, will the IRS find out about it? If I do this, can I hide it this way, or can I do this?" They are looking for every way to be unethical. But when Joe comes to me, he says, "Keep me as far away from that line as you can. I want to walk here." And he sat down. The discussion was over that day. They all voted unanimously to retain him as CEO. I packed up my stuff and came home. And as I left that day, I thought to myself, that's who I want to be. I want to be someone, when they say the name of Mary Crafts Homer, that is synonymous with integrity. Now, I'm not perfect. I have made many mistakes in my life. But to have that as your single goal out there determines the rudder. Sometimes winds push me, but with strength and holding on, that rudder can bring me back. The decision to make and to live an ethical life is not a single choice you make just one time. You make it, but then you're faced again with making it every single day. So many opportunities to live out of the lines, whether it be your taxes, how I handle customer complaints, a wallet I might find. I get out to my car and see an item underneath the grocery cart that they forgot to ring up. Well, they're charging me a lot anyway. I'll pay for it next time. Little items along the way that you're always challenged with. What am I about? Who is Mary Crafts Homer about? If you make these decisions ahead of time, they're easier to make as the choices are placed in front of you on a daily basis. Early in my career, I selected 5 values that I was going to live by no matter what, at all times and in all things and in all places. And those 5 values stand as a rudder for me out in front of me all the time. And I filter choices through those 5 values all the time. Once again, it's hard to stand up here and talk about stuff like this because then you set yourself up as being perfect, because I know I'm not. But it's those values that keep me moving toward that goal. For me, those 5 values were these. I wanted to be a woman of service. I wanted to be a woman of excellence, that every day I brought my best. Not perfection, because perfection will kill you. If you strive for perfection, seriously, it gives you heart attacks and all sorts of crazy things. But if you strive for excellence, it inspires you. That every day I think, is this my best I can bring? And if it is, it's enough. I want to be about abundance. Abundance is one of those strange values that not very many people understand, but it kind of looks like this. Am I mic'd? Okay, good, I can walk over here. If you live in non-abundance, you live like this. Everything you have, you are holding on tight to. You are keeping close to you. You do not believe that there is going to be something provided for you if you let go of what you have, and you darn well better get your fair share, because life is not fair, you know. But if you live in the value of abundance, you live like this. And you know that what you have is in one eternal round with someone else. This morning I was on the phone with my daughter-in-law, and her mother's coming down to gather up artwork to take up to Wyoming to sell for an auction to raise some funds for a nonprofit organization. And I said, I want you to go through my house. And I said, up in my office, I have these 3 photos. In these 2 areas, I have 2 more photos. I put 3 on the washer for you. And she said, do you want to give away all that artwork? And I said, yeah, I can't wait to see what's going to come to me. I'm excited to see what new artwork's going to flow my direction. Because you live like this. Now, if you live like this, what position are you to receive all that the universe has to flow to you? None. But if you live like this, not only are you open to the giving part of it, but to the receiving part of it. It's like living in a sandbox. This has nothing to do with integrity, but I like this analogy, so I'm telling it to you anyway. It's like living in a sandbox. So picture that you live in a sandbox on a beach, and your sandbox is full of sand, and somebody else has a sandbox next to you. You spend your entire time helping that person. You know, oh, you don't have much sand. How about some sand? How about some sand? And then pretty soon you notice that your sandbox is getting a little low on sand. So you start slowing down, giving out that sand. Well, here's a little sand for you today, but that's all I can give today. And then your box is getting really low, and pretty soon you say, I'm not able to give any sand today. You just have to make it do on your own, because I don't have any sand to give up today. But if you look up, rather than at your sandbox, you realize that you live on a beach that is covered with sand. And anytime you want sand, it's available. So you taking sand on this side, and you're dishing it out on this one. That's the principle of abundance. The principle of accountability. I'll talk more about that later. It's huge in my life. And the principle of integrity. So through those 5 values, I defined how I wanted to run my life and my company. The principle of integrity is probably the single most powerful tool that any of you have to grow a powerful, well-sustained business. I see it as better than any math, accounting, business class you could take. If you learn this single principle, you cannot help but be successful. This is how I think it goes. What I'm selling at Culinary Crafts is not catering. I'm selling the concept of trust. The people who pay the kind of money that I charge at Culinary Crafts are doing it because they want peace of mind. They want trust. They want to know that what we're bringing is what we've promised. So if you're planning your daughter's wedding, how wonderful is that to have a caterer that you know they're going to show up with what they put on their contract. If you're planning a product launch, this is your once-in-a-lifetime product launch, you want to trust who's going to be orchestrating that event for you. If you're planning a grand opening or a nonprofit fundraiser that's going to determine whether or not your programs are funded for the rest of the year, you want a caterer that's going to be there and you trust them to be there. That principle and that ability to portray trust to people has brought us more business than any other single thing at Culinary Crafts. We can market and we can put all these great things on our website, but if nobody trusts us to produce, nobody buys. The flip side of that, and I belong to an organization called Corporate Alliance, and they always say, People do business with people they know. I take it farther. People do business with people they know and trust. Another part of it is what that value does for those who want to do business with me. Okay? So I find myself getting the best pricing, the best incentives from people, the best discounts. Why? Because people want to do business with Culinary Crafts. They know that push come to shove, I'm paying their bill. That they don't have to come after me. During the recession, I saw businesses, creating companies across this country go out of business. Leave creditors high and dry. That's why they want Culinary Crafts business, is because they know that no matter what they deliver to our back door, they're going to be paid for. That gives you an incredible power in business. Gives you more bargaining power than you can possibly get any other direction. Having someone know that who they're selling to is a person of integrity. My employees know they're going to get a paycheck. I never have anyone come to work thinking, I wonder if Mary's going to ask us to wait for our checks next week, or I wonder if this one will bounce. Never enters their mind. They know Culinary Crafts is going to stand behind whatever we have promised. They know I would sell the clothes off my back, and I have a few, to meet any financial obligation I had. Recently, we were in the middle of getting ready to take out a large loan. And in this large loan, they asked for a personal guarantee. This was not just a personal guarantee of my company, but of me personally, which meant all my assets, my home, everything. I didn't have a problem. Someone said to me, oh, Mary, you need to avoid signing that personal guarantee. You need to go back to the bank. You need to make sure they take that personal guarantee off. Because if they have that on there, if something goes wrong, they'd come after you. And I'm like, yeah, they should. If I take out a huge loan and I don't pay them, they should come after me. Now, they sold us that, gave us that loan because they knew they wouldn't have to. If I got to that point, I'd be selling it long before then to give to them. This concept of the corporate veil is a flawed one. We hear this a lot about people who draw a line between how they want to live their personal life and how they want to live their business life. And they, you know, living in this valley, the examples are rampant. That there are people who talk one walk on Sunday and another walk during the week. I don't get that, because this corporate veil line is just a symbol of that. That whatever I do in the corporate world shouldn't affect me in my personal life. And I should be able to draw a line. I don't see that. It is one of the single most things, in my opinion, that's attributed to this culture of unaccountability that we live with today. The decision for ethical business practices can often be seen when you're in a tough financial spot. That's when you really know whether you are ethical or not, when you are pushed up against the wall financially. In the beginning, they were tough. After a lifetime, they're a little easier now. In the beginning, when a catering deal, when an event went poorly and I was going to have to give them back their money, that was like make or break whether or not I was going to be in business the next day. Because I didn't have what it took financially to take a $2,000 hit. Now we do tickets where sometimes the price tags are $150,000. If you had to give that back, could you sustain that hit? Your ability to sustain those kind of things, your willingness to step up, determines the level of integrity that you want to operate your company at. Now, we're good at Culinary Crafts, but we're not perfect. Sometimes there are problems. We do our best to make sure that we are bringing our best every single day. Because these are once-in-a-lifetime events. I don't get another chance to make it right. If I mess up somebody's wedding, I don't get to say, oh, I'm sorry, let's do that again tomorrow. If I mess up any of these events that we're doing, we do not get a second chance at it. It's not like, you know, you were doing some programming for a computer, you sent that off, and it wasn't right, and they send it back and they say, do it again. We never have that chance. So making restitution, complete restitution, is impossible. But there are things that I do in a very systematic order to mitigate that problem. The very first and foremost thing that I do is to take responsibility. This principle of accountability takes people off guard because they call ready for a fight. I just want to tell you about yesterday and your staff. I'm just one here, I'm all ears. What is it? Well, this is what happened. I am so sorry that that was your experience. They aren't ready for that. It takes them back. They're like, oh, well, you know, it wasn't all bad. And there was just this one little thing, actually. And suddenly, you've disarmed what is a very explosive situation. Be willing to step up and take responsibility for what you're responsible for. Now, sometimes people think they have a problem, even when I don't think they've had a problem. But I still can be sorry for their experience. I can still apologize for their perception of what happened. And that apology goes a long ways. I had a client last summer, and I have my lovely good friend, Miss Virginia, sitting in the audience here. And she was having her once-in-a-lifetime wedding, and it was a destination wedding. And I was not able to be there. We had 7 crucial events that night. And since she had a wedding planner, I thought, well, maybe this is one event that I won't show up at. And in retrospect, I still think I made the right decision. It rained that night, and rained everywhere in Utah. Rained like we had never seen rain in Utah. And perhaps you remember this last year. I think I still know the date. We had events everywhere. One event in Holiday on Walker Lane, I was not at that event. They moved it 3 times. The event that I was at the Natural History Museum. We had everything on the patio set up, had to move inside, move to the 3rd floor, setting off fire alarms because we're trying to cook inside. We were supposed to be outside. It was just one nightmare after another. The wedding that was at the lovely Red Cliff Ranch in Heber City, of course, did not take so kindly to their change of plans. And so her one statement to me that was so difficult for me to hear was, if you had been there, Mary, this would not have happened. Okay, I'm good, but I'm not that good. Okay? You know, I don't have control over the weather, even though I've prayed over it many times, I'll tell you. But I don't have control over the weather. But she really felt at deep levels that if I had been there, this would have come out differently. That was her perception. Not reality, but her perception. So I had to deal with her perception. And I was deeply and sincerely sorry for her experience. And usually the next thing then is I put the solution back into their hands and say, what would you have me do? How can I make this right? I sometimes suggest options, but I never tell them what to do or tell them what I'm going to do. I leave it to them. Now, sometimes, if their solution is unreasonable, as I felt this bride from last year was, I will tell them so. I'll say, that seems to me to be an unfair request. However, if that is what you feel is right, that is what I will do. And the mother, with no uncertain terms, said, that's what I feel is right. And that's what I did. Some of the time, people are so taken back by your willingness to step forward and be accountable, to have integrity, that they just say, oh, it really was not that big of a deal. Sometimes they have you be somewhat financially responsible. Sometimes they have you be a lot financially responsible. But most of the time, in fact, I have to say, in 100% of the time, I feel I have made the right decisions in dealing with my clients with integrity. I recently had one of my employees who was going to UVU and having a business ethics class interview me on this topic of ethics, and he asked me this question. It's an interesting question. He said, what keeps people from being ethical when it seems like it makes such logical sense to be ethical? You make such a great argument for being ethical. Why would people not choose to be ethical? And I thought for a moment, and I said, fear. Fear is what keeps people from being ethical. They do not want to take responsibility because they're afraid what those consequences will bring. That starts when you're little. My son Caleb, unfortunately, is not here, but I remember very clearly coming home, and there was that screen on my front living room window, cut straight up. And I said, what happened to this screen? I always ask Caleb. I don't know. The tiger did it. The tiger. The tiger. Yeah, it's the tiger. He was 5. I said, okay. And we worked through that, what those consequences mean, and how, as time goes on, other consequences happen. If you don't learn this lesson of integrity, it starts off with a pinprick, and then it becomes a shove, and then it becomes a 2x4, and then it becomes a car, and if you're still not learning it, next thing you got a freight train at you. Learn this lesson. Learn it slowly, gently. I ask every day, please let me learn my lessons with pinpricks that I might listen. Save the 2x4s for the ones I'm not listening. Fear of financial consequences. I don't want to have to pay for this, so I don't want to take responsibility for it. Fear of social. Sometimes we're full of fear of what other people will think if I step up and take responsibility. Sometimes we have fear of just being rejected. Probably underlying all of it is we have a fear that somehow there's going to be a withdrawal of love if we say, I did that. In my company, we have what we call the take list, the dreaded take list. It's everything that has to go to an event. So when you're in the catering business, you have to load everything into a van and drive 100 miles. And when you get there, if you have the wrong things in the van, that's when you have clients calling. Okay? So the idea is for the take list to be 100% perfect, which of course we know perfection kills you. We just look for the best. But what about those 2% then that you're falling down on? When it arrives at the event, it's the wrong item. Then there are those people who read a take list and say, frosted votives. Let's see, what is that? Nobody here really to help me. I guess it must be this. We'll take those and we'll go. When we arrive on site, of course, what they've grabbed are sternos that go underneath Schaefer's, and they're not votives at all. And so I always say, who loaded this list? There's dead silence. Nobody wants to take responsibility. They're like, I don't know, I think Henry did. So then I take the list to Henry. Henry, did you load this? No, that's Trevor. I said, okay, so I take it to Trevor. Trevor, did you load this? No, I think that was one of the new kids. I said, did you let a new kid load the list? Well, not me. Somebody else gave it to him. I don't know who. And I go through like 12 people trying to find out who loaded this list when I just need somebody to say, I loaded that. Now, fear is why they don't step up to the plate. Plain and simple, fear. They're afraid that Mary is going to be really mad and really yell and really give it to them, and maybe they're going to lose their job. Because I have been known to be a little hot under the collar at events if I have too much stress. Not that I ever have stress. But most of the time, the reason I want to know who loaded it is not to yell at them or not to demean them in front of their other people, their staff, their team. It's rather to teach them. This is what you loaded. This is called sterno. What I wanted were votive candles. And they're the little holder that you put the candle into. And it's frosted, which means you can't see through it. It's opaque. So when you get back to the plant, I want you to ask somebody to show you what those are so that next time you load it correctly. Now, I can guarantee you when I have the opportunity to teach that and that someone steps to the plate and is responsible, they never load that incorrectly again. Because every time they see that word frosted votive on the take list, they think, I remember this. Mary talked to me about this. Okay, it's not that, it's this. That is an opportunity, but people don't allow us to take that opportunity because they're too afraid to step up. The accountable person is a teachable person. If something is never someone's mistake, you can never grow then, you can never learn, you can never show and have the opportunity to display integrity. I want to make sure I leave some time here, and I'm almost out of time. So 2 final thoughts, I'm going to be very quick with them. One is about debt. I've talked a couple times here about being in debt, what it did to me. I talked about taking out a loan recently. How do those 2 things come together? Okay. I was interviewed this morning by the Daily Herald, who wanted to do an article on this award. And she said, if you were to give one piece of advice, a single piece of advice to someone who was thinking about going into business, what would it be? And I said, don't get ahead of yourself. Don't get in debt farther than what you can afford to lose. Okay? When I think about the principles that we have lived on at Culinary Crafts, this principle of integrity, staying out of debt and living debt-free is right at the top of that list. Those of you who are, so many of you are students in here, I want you to live debt-free the rest of your life. And this is how you do it. So listen up. Think of what car you're driving today. Think about it, hate it, love it, embrace it. It's yours. Drive this car until you've paid for it, free and clear. And then drive it 4 more years. And while you're driving it, those last 4 years, you're saving. And then you buy your first car without any sort of a loan payment on it. And you will do that the rest of your life. Because from that point on, you will be ahead and saving for your next car, and your next car, and your next car. And I started that principle with a 1967 Cutlass. And I tell you, I did not like driving that Cutlass. It was my first delivery vehicle in the catering business, because remember I had lost the yellow Eldorado. Okay? But I drove that until I could afford to buy the next vehicle for cash. And today I drove here in a Mercedes that I paid for in cash. You can live debt-free. It's the most freeing principle you will ever have. Now, so how do you put that with having a loan? Recently, in the last 2 years, I've taken out 2 loans. I'm more in debt right now than I've ever been in my entire life. I've lived debt-free right up until that point. Own my house, own my business, own all my cars, own everything at Culinary Crafts, done, good. And then suddenly, here I am in debt. What's the difference and why is this okay with me? Well, sometimes it's still not okay with me, but most of the time it is. And the reason is because there's a big difference between appreciable debt and depreciable debt. If you're putting things on credit cards for some clothes, or if you're taking out a loan for a car, you can never get ahead of that interest. Your car will be long gone before you have that car paid off, and you'll want another one. Because that 67 Cutlass is not looking too good anymore, rusted. But when you take out a loan for appreciable assets that have the ability to grow and that are an investment, the thing I took 2 loans out on, one, I bought a building in downtown Salt Lake to house our corporate offices. I have 2 tenants upstairs. I have 1 tenant with me on the main floor. Hello, Laura, Mar. And then we use it for our corporate offices and our tasting room. That was a good, solid investment. I thought long and hard. I recently took out the 2nd loan as we broke ground this last week on our 19,000 square foot facility that we're building out in Pleasant Grove. That is a good, solid investment. And now my focus is to take those profits as I earn them above and beyond the payments and pay that puppy off as fast as I can. Not so that now I can do more catering, and now I'm going to have a better house. No, so that my focus is paying those people off, and then if there's leftover money, well, I'm still not going to buy a bigger house. The last thing I want to leave with you is this concept I talked about with fear. Don't make your life decisions based on fear. Make your decisions based on principle. Decide today what those principles are going to be for you and filter every decision through them. If you're living in fear, your decisions are not going to be great ones. I have lived plenty of my life in fear. I know what fear feels like at deep, deep levels. But I also remember that day in Sydney, Australia, standing at the bottom of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And my whole family was getting ready to go up over that bridge. I was in the bathroom, in a stall, crying because I was too afraid. And as I sat there in that stall, I thought to myself, not ever again. I am done living my life afraid. I'm going to go up over that bridge. And I did. When I got there, I found it wasn't a big deal at all. You're completely harnessed in, and you know, they said you couldn't even take a pencil up there because if it drops, of course, it goes right through somebody's head. So it's pretty far up there. But it was a change for me. Live your life in joy and exhilaration. I wish nothing more for you. Thank you. All right, so I ended 6 minutes early, and they promised me that there would be questions. So don't let me just stand up here. Yes, there is a question, guys. Okay, good.
What was the biggest difference between your auto business that failed and your catering business that success?
That's an interesting concept. Gelato business, if you can imagine it, 32 plus years ago here in Utah County was a death sentence. Because gelato was sold like this, in this little tiny scoop of absolutely premium, over-the-top ice cream. And it cost a lot of money. And as Utah County clientele would come in, they would say, now wait a minute, I can get this much for this much, and over here at this ice cream store I can get this much. It didn't take them long to learn that they did not like gelato, they liked ice cream. We were only open 4 months. A couple things very different. When I started the catering company, a lot of people said, Mary, you're making the same mistake. You're going for that top small percentage of people who want quality products. You're making the same mistake. But I knew that that's where my passion was. My passion was not in making funeral potatoes. It just wasn't. My passion was in making, you know, pommes dauphinoise. That's where I was my best work. So the difference had to come in what I was willing to risk. Over here in the gelato business, 100% financed. I did not put one dime of my own money into it. I borrowed way more money than what I could afford to lose. Over here, I took everything I had, $150, and started. And I grew it from scratch. And I was not going to have a credit card company calling me again. I was not going to live my life that I didn't want to, afraid to answer the phone. And I grew it slow and steady and sure. And when I had enough money, we bought our first catering van. This is back when things were a little bit different with car seat laws. They were more like guidelines. So instead of having a car that I could carry my family in, my 2 boys were in the back on top of milk crates, and we had a catering van. We didn't have a personal car. We had to drive real slow around the curves, and sometimes you go around like, oh, we just lost the boys. But I grew it at a pace that I could afford. And so, like, during the recession, during that time, I was president of the International Caterers Association, and, well, I was going to be president, and then I stepped aside. And because it was a deeply traumatic part of my personal life. But in that recession, I saw caterers all over the country who were as strong as caterers as we were, who were at the top of their market share, closing their doors. Why? Because they were too in debt. When this recession hit, we lost 45% of our business. That's a huge chunk, 45%. But nobody came to take our vehicles. Nobody came to take our building. Nobody came to repossess a piece of equipment because I owned it all free and clear. So I could have sustained the hit, and we just tightened our belts and rode it out. Anyone else? Anyone at all? Yes. Miss Hill.
How do you see your service in the community impacting your business?
Okay, service in the community. You know, there were so many years where I lived my life with just my head down, going forward. I dared not look up because it was all I could do to survive, take care of my family, grow this business, and just down. And finally one day I said, you know, I think I'm no longer pretending at being a caterer. I think I really am. I think I'm kind of good at it. I think people see me as an expert. And I began to kind of lift my head up and a little bit of a vision. And then I began to see that this community had supported me in so many ways. Even when I made mistakes, it's a small community. People know your mistakes. And as I began to look up, I realized that it was my turn to give back. And so I joined with you, for example, at the United Way and became one of the founders of Women in Philanthropy. Where's Janae? I saw her. So in Sydney. We do a lot of good in this community. And as you start that road of service, of giving back, you don't start it with the idea of what's this going to bring to me, you know, business-wise. But in the end, I have to say that my service in this community, whether it be on the 2 boards I'm on at UVU, I rub shoulders with people who are way wealthier than I am and are way bigger businesses. My Women in Philanthropy, you know, and when I work out at the Thanksgiving Point and different charities that I'm involved with, when I get to MC an event and I'm up on stage in front of 500 people, next thing I know, they're calling me for catering. Who knew? Well, you know. So it is one eternal round. It's that concept of living in abundance. The more you give out and the more you serve and the more you're willing to be there for people, the more you have flowing back to you. I think our time is up. Thank you for sharing this time with me.
Thank you, Mary Crafts-Homer. It's a pleasure to have Mary here today. I failed to recognize her husband, Rick Homer, is here today, so thanks. We better give Rick a round of applause.
And my son, Ryan.
And Ryan. Where is Ryan?
Ryan, raise your hand, Ryan.
There's
there
Ryan.
You go.